about atheism, we talked about. Right now I'm working on the next book because Amazon wants another book. This time they wanted non-fiction, and I'm working seriously in a way scholarly manner because I'm doing a lot of research on this. The title of the book would be Yoga for the Godless, because yoga, which is derived from Sankhya basically, except the practices are added on mostly, doesn't have much of a concept of Ishvara or God as creator. It's more to do with purifying your mind, cleaning your system so that you become free. It's not such an important part of this yogic practice. Why I'm doing this is because very often cults take up the practice of yoga and turn it into something religious, which is okay as long as it doesn't disrupt. But when it becomes disruptive, then even politics, we have the right and the left, and the right can always use yoga and religion as one of their calling card, but it's not so. Yoga has nothing to do with it.
Well, this is in some ways my view, which is, one, any practice that offers benefit to another and to others, I cannot argue with. But that being said, you can feel content, you can feel happy, usually if you define your life as being of service to others, then that is ultimately the highest pinnacle, and you don't need any God or God-like entity to allow you to do that. Getting back, I think you've commented on what you call neurotheology.
I don't know much about it, but...
well, it's interesting because there is a body of work on this. And if you look at the evolution of our species, we have two aspects. One is a very good memory, and the result of having a very good memory is regret. And the other is a perception of death,
right.
Which for many people is frightening. Yeah. So what happens for many people is that mentally they spend most of their time with regret or fear.
New way of looking at it.
Yeah. And so some people would argue that this concept of religion is to diminish
this fear
of death. Because if you believe that when you die, you either have a karmic existence of rebirth, or you go to heaven, or you're in some other blissful, wonderful place that rewards you for being a good person, it allows you to escape that fear. In fact, there's a body of evidence that shows that religious people live longer. And in some ways, though, whether for good or bad, if you are able to decrease fear and anxiety, and this is what meditation offers you, you become less stressed. These inflammatory proteins, which are associated with chronic disease, decrease. These hormones, which are associated with stress and anxiety, which are released on a chronic level in people who are anxious, are all very detrimental to your health. So if you have bliss based on a lack of fear of death, then that can actually benefit you physiologically, but it could also have negative consequences, because if you use that bliss to justify negative behaviors, that of course is a problem. There's a philosopher which you might like named Dennett, and actually he's a very outspoken atheist actually, but he talks about something called the gold army and the silver army. And I may confuse these, but if I recall correctly, it's this idea people go to war with absolute belief, they're fearless, right? Because they can go forward and are afraid of nothing, because death is meaningless, because ultimately death leads to afterlife. While the silver army, they're much more entwined with our present reality and thoughtful about consequences.
Survival.
Yes, yes. So it's an interesting.
But don't you think there's also the other side, that if you believe in heaven and hell, suppose, you're also filled with great fear, and your whole life is spent trying not to do this, not to do that, because you might go to hell.
But that's the purpose of religion too, to create a moral, ethical framework of behavior. And that's why there are some people, religious people, who say that their religion, or whatever religion, is absolutely necessary for you to live a moral, ethical life. There are other people like Sam Harris and others who, and myself, who say you don't need any religious foundation.
You can be ethical anyway.
Yes, yeah. So you can be a wonderful, kind, caring person without this. And this is
the Buddhists.
Yeah.
They don't have a concept of Ishvara or a great creator God, but ethics is so important. The Jains, case in point, because in my research I figured out that even before the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there was the Yogacara school of Buddhists, and before that the Jains, who are called the Shramanas, who have a complete literature, yogic literature, practice and theory. So it is, what I'm trying to say is not dependent on that. That's what I'm trying to say. It could be independent, could be.